Well, hi everybody. Father Alex here. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. My guest this week on the Godcast is Moazzam Begg, and I do hope you enjoy this interview now. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is Moazzam Begg. Moazzam, it's great to get you on the Godcast. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you, and thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for coming on. Now, um, I'm sure, like myself, you're in this spiritual season. I'm in Lent, and you're in Ramadan. Mozam, can I start by asking you, is it a joyous time for you? Is it a difficult time? Just tell us a bit about Ramadan from your own perspective.
Yeah, so Ramadan is a joyous time, of course it is, because at the end of it you have the festival where you celebrate all the sacrifices that you've made, which are, of course, to do with the dietary requirements, your food and drink, not eating and drinking from sunrise to sunset, which in this period of time it's not so bad. It's much harder in the summer, but really, the purpose of it isn't just not eating, just not drinking. It's about abstention, and it's about being aware of not just your bodily requirements, but of your soul's requirements. And what is it that your soul can do? So, in these particular last 10 nights of Ramadan in that month, we not only fast during the day, we pray during the night. And by that, we mean sustained periods of prayer, standing in prayer, reciting from the Quran, calling upon God to forgive our sins and to make us into better people and to bring about a better situation for all of us. So that culminates into the heart and soul of Ramadan, which happens. We seek what's known as the night of power, which is in the last 10 nights on the odd nights. And that becomes very tiring on the body, but also very uplifting because the Imam will pray, he'll raise his hands, and he'll make such a powerful supplication that often you'll hear the whole congregation, sometimes of hundreds of thousands of people, just crying.
Yeah. Is it something that has evolved for you as you got older? Was it a struggle as a child? Were you kind of reticent? Were you resistant to your parents? Just tell us a bit how it's changed over the years.
Yeah, of course. I mean, growing up in the UK in Birmingham, I was born and raised in Birmingham, and it was a very different environment. I used to actually I studied at a Jewish primary school, so a lot of my as it were, religious upbringing was kind of in school Jewish and at home Muslim. So that part of understanding the importance of faith was very central to me. But at the same time, growing up, being part of sort of youth culture and so forth, you tend not to be too religious. And I was like that until a particular moment came in my time in growing up where I started to ask fundamental questions about, what happens next. And one of my close friends passed away. And I had serious misgivings about how I was living, but also, where is he? Is he alive? Is he dead? Is he gone to heaven? Is he gone to hell? Or is there just nothing? So all those sort of questions started to come to me at that around my early 20s.
And obviously, Moazam, you're known for your incarceration as well as other things. What about during that period of time? Could you just share a bit about how your faith shaped and shifted in those times of incarceration? Perhaps starting when you were kind of sent there. Did you know where you were, for example?
So yeah, it was in 2002. I had evacuated with my family, where I was living in Afghanistan at the time. We were building schools and wells, and when the war began, we moved to Pakistan. Pakistan, I was literally raided in the middle of the night, taken by the CIA, Pakistani intelligence, and sent off then to a secret series of secret locations, including in Afghanistan. And in Afghanistan, in the Bagram detention facility, which was notorious for torture and murder. I spent my first Ramadan, and that was the oddest Ramadan I've ever had. So we didn't know whether it was sunset or sunrise, and we didn't know the timings. People being, as I said, tortured to death. Yet in the midst of all of that, I had American soldiers, many of them were Southern Baptists and evangelists and so forth, with whom this strange relationship built up because I was one of the very few who spoke English fluently. In fact, better than my captors. And we'd have conversations about religion, drawn out ones, about the Bible, about the Quran, about the meaning of life, and so forth. And I think you probably can't see it behind me, but I have a Bible that was given to me by one of the soldiers, and it's an American military Bible with a full combat colors on there. So we'd often have that discussion between different aspects of the Bible and the Quran and so forth. So the spirituality aspect always remained. The discussion, the debate, the understanding. I was very firm in my belief, and some of the guards were also. But there were also some guards who later, especially after in Guantanamo, where I was mostly in solitary confinement, actually embraced Islam. They accepted Islam just because of this kind of spiritual void that existed. Um, so it wouldn't be right to say that all the Americans mistreated us and my spiritual journey didn't develop. Actually, it's the opposite. Um, I became closer to my faith. I had a stronger understanding after hours of solitary confinement, in fact, years of solitary confinement, reading the Quran, kind of formulating my thoughts, compartmentalizing them, and trying to better myself. Because, in a sense, in that place, both physically through press ups and sit ups and all that stuff, you can definitely make yourself better. But also spiritually, I think for me that was a turning point. It really was a turning point.
What do you think it was about solitary confinement that does that, Moazzam? I've listened to Terry Waite talk about his situation where he was kidnapped and he spent years in isolation. And I've also read about Chinese Christians who kind of gone underground because they weren't able to practice their faith in public, and how that they come out and say it's made me a stronger Christian, or what's going on there, do you think? You know, where's God in that kind of experience?
Yeah, well, Terry Waite's a fantastic example because I've spoken to him a few times, and my father, he campaigned with my father to get me out of Guantanamo. So, um, the understanding of how important faith is in a time like that, it cannot be overstressed because essentially everything, as human beings has been taken away from us. Our environments, the food that we like, our relatives, our freedom, and our hope for the future. We really don't know what's going to happen. So therefore, you must look towards something that is not temporal, something that is beyond this life. And as Christians, as Muslims, whatever religion we follow, we do have a concept of the afterlife and preparing ourselves for that. And it's really that connection is that what is it that we are doing right now that could benefit us? Whether it's prayer, whether it's helping others, whether it's a word that may help someone in a worse situation that we're in. You as a prisoner might see somebody struggling far more than you. And that in itself is an act, a deed that could bring you closer to God, bring you a better future. You're investing, as it's said, into your hereafter by the good deeds that you do. Um, so in solitary confinement, that's much harder to do because there aren't many people to interact with. Um, and then it's just you and God. But even in that, there is a blessing because how often do you get sustained periods where you can be in total solitude? Jesus is in the wilderness. Muhammad, peace be upon them all, is in the mountain and in the cave receiving revelation. And so often you hear of the pious people in the past would spend times in solitude to gain that unique connection. Now, I'm not saying we're like saints or anything, but we're taking having a little bit of a taste of that connection.
And what was your kind of daily thought process, Mozam? Was it kind of just to get through the day? Was it to look a few days ahead? Did you think long term during those experiences? You know, could you ever imagine the light at the end of the tunnel?
I recall this occasion, and this, I think he's the soldier who gave me this Bible. And, he's trying to get me to become sort of more Christian, and I'm trying to get him to become Muslim. Either way, he said something to me, it was very, very profound. He said, people ask themselves in a difficult situation, why me, O Lord? But why don't they say, why not me? In other words, there's this great statement of the Prophet, peace be upon him, when God loves a person, he tests him. And so imagine you go through life and everything is normal and you're not tested in any way at all. So that was one of the things that I thought. But sorry, could you just repeat your question as well? Because I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, just to say what was the kind of the thought process in the moment of the solitary confinement? Was it kind of I just need to get through the day one day at a time? I
Mhm.
think there's a song there somewhere. Or was it far-reaching? Did you dream of the day where you'd be freed?
There was a point in which the interrogators, by the necessity, were trying to frighten me and everyone else. You're never going home. You've been abandoned. There's no, see, where we were, there was no communication. There's no phone calls. There's no visits. There's no telephone. There's no television. There is just nothing. There is no communication with the outside world. We're in total incommunicado. So by definition, they want you to be entirely reliant upon them. Um, and think that there is no hope except through the interrogator. And that worked, I know, at least in the early days when it seemed like that this is a totally lawless operation. But as time went on, that connection, my connection with God, built and became stronger. Reading the Quran, connecting to its verses, there's literal verses that say that do people think that they will believe and they will not be tested? Those who came before you were tested far greater. And of course, that exists across religions. And when I started to internalize that, and it became much easier. I really don't care now what my interrogators say about the future is because they don't determine it. We believe that God determines the future, and whatever happens tomorrow ultimately is his decision in the great scheme of things. They may be arbiters in between that, but I'm no longer dependent upon them. And when that happened, after I think at least after about a year, it took a year, then I became more content.
And what about people look to people, don't they, of experience, and I think sometimes people look to me as a vicar, as a parish priest, as somebody who never loses faith or never asks questions or never, and I feel probably now as I've got older, or as I can say that, I don't think there's anything that could happen in my life that would affect my faith in God. But I haven't been in your situation. What was your lowest moment? Did you ever doubt your faith? Did you ever get cross at yourself for doubting your faith? Can you just share a bit of that with the audience, if you could?
There was a period of time that I was desperately in need to speak to someone, any other human being who doesn't see me as the enemy. And that was almost impossible because the whole system did. But they did have imams and chaplains. Now, I asked for them to see an imam and they didn't let it happen. I said, can I please then see the chaplain? The Christian chaplain. I just need to speak to somebody who understands spirituality a little bit. But that didn't happen. So it didn't happen for the whole period of time that I was there. And I don't know whether they thought I was a threat in terms of my understanding and having been brought up here and understanding religion. And as I said, there were some guards who became Muslims, but I don't know why they would have seen that as a threat either. Nonetheless, uh, it was paramount to me. It was really important to me that the faith that I held was the shield. It was my shield that protected me from everything else. And as I say, without exaggeration, I've experienced prison in the UK and other places, but nothing had prepared me for what was about to happen there. And uh, I can't describe what it's like to see somebody tied with his hands above his head to the top of the cage, being punched and kicked repeatedly until he's dead, uh, and being able to do nothing about it. That is a massive test of your faith because you ask yourself, why didn't I do anything? Why am I helpless to do anything? I can't step into that place and protect that guy, let alone the abuses that I'd faced. You can't even defend yourself. So yeah, there's a massive then test that comes to you as to what does my faith mean? And of course, I'd be lying if I said that my faith wasn't in terribly tested to the point of my faith level being very low at certain points of time. Um, but it fluctuates. Faith fluctuates. One day your faith can be as high as the sky, and the other day as low as you can get. And that's what being a human being is. And it helped me to recognize that I can't be expected to be at this level of a saint, neither of a sinner. I'm something in between.
And you just alluded to there, Moazzam, that you've seen some pretty awful, well, not pretty awful, absolutely devastating things in your life, and I've seen them more locally, but not to the extent that you have, and we all see them on a worldwide scale now. How does your faith help you deal with what you've witnessed and seen, if it does in any way? I'd be interested to know your thoughts on that.
Um, you know, I believe my faith or the religion of Islam is the final revelation. It's supposed to be the one that brings the last ability for human beings to get closer to perfection. In reality, you can have a faith and a belief system there, and then you can have the people who follow it. And I would be wrong to say that if I didn't think that many people from my own faith, let's suffice to say, don't follow it, and as a result become ambassadors of the opposite of what that faith teaches. Um, I try, and I recognize that in everything that I do, whether I'm giving a sermon, whether I'm giving a talk, whether I'm walking the streets, whether I'm going to the shops, whether I'm involved in work, that I'm an ambassador of what I believe in. And what anything I do will reflect upon that. That's how people are. People are not going to just look at faith and say, "Oh, that looks really nice in terms of its belief system and its creedal systems and so forth." But its practitioners don't seem to be a manifestation of that. So I try my best, and I don't set the bar so high, whereas it's impossible as a human being to kind of, make yourself into an angel. But simple things that if I say something, if I give my word, if somebody needs help, if somebody is struggling, then I'll try my best to assist them. And it's my religious convictions that drive me to do that, as opposed to me just saying I want to be a good human being. We all want to be good human beings, but I want to, as it were, at least benefit some way in when I'm no longer alive from those deeds.
Yeah. And leaving Guantanamo, Moazzam, tell us about that moment. Was it almost a case of disbelief? Did just tell us, explain to us that moment.
There was a series of process that took place that eventually I was released and sent back home to the UK. And I've written about it in my book, but the belief is that this is going to come to an end. Yeah, it came. It was there before, and it was because certain things were happening. I was beginning to feel that I don't actually want to go right now. I'm not ready to go. I'm gaining things in my internal development. I don't want to go. And that's that. Imagine just saying that I don't want to leave Guantanamo. I'd only been there for 3 years. I know people who've been there for 23 years now and still. Um, but nonetheless, that's how I felt. And that's, I think, was the evidence that I needed for this is going to be true. I'm going home. And I did. And when I arrived back home, I had three children when I was taken into custody, but there was a fourth who I'd never seen. So now he was 3 years old, and I was meeting him for the first time. And I had always written, my youngest son. I'd told my wife, I don't know, she never received the message through the Red Cross, but I said to her, name him Ibrahim or Abraham after the but she decided to name him Ayub. And Ayub is actually in English, it's Job, the prophet Job. And she named him that because of all of the terrible tests that he'd gone through as a man of his own faith. And she felt that that was the most appropriate. So he's got both names now. But
That's
that
a
was all
nice,
part of it.
yeah.
Yeah, that was all part of the kind of the journey, and then coming back and meeting all of these people, including Ibrahim Ayub. Uh, I wasn't really prepared for because I had my tears had dried by this time. I had steeled myself to say that, look, if I start focusing on family, I'm going to go crazy. So let me focus on my personal, it's a selfish personal development. Physically, I'm doing my press ups. Mentally, I'm reading my Quran. I'm doing my prayers. I'm writing poetry. I'm planning for the future. But if I focus too much on the kids, I'm going to go nuts.
How difficult was it not to be there anymore, Moazzam? It might sound like the wrong way around to ask the question, but was it difficult not to be there?
Yeah, it was very difficult because I was very, very close to my children. I'm a very hands-on, was a very hands-on father, uh, being involved in every little thing from reading bedtime stories to their education to making preparations of their school and taking them to school, picking them up, everything. I was involved in all of it. and then to be kind of taken out of it immediately was very hard. But Allah has been extremely merciful because, as I said to you, I am amongst the lucky ones. A, I'm British. B, I was only there for 3 years. I deal with a series of people from around the world, Moroccans, Algerians, Afghans, Pakistanis, Saudis, Yemenis, wherever you name it, coming back home after 20 years. There's one guy that his son's here in the UK right now. He's 24 years old. He's from Russia. He's never met his father. His father was imprisoned for 23 years without charge or trial. Um, so when I look at them and think, imagine, how would I deal with that? And there's just no answer.
I've got so many questions in my head. And then coming home after being in Guantanamo, was it difficult to readjust? Was it, were you? I can only imagine the mind games that were going on. Just say a bit about that if you would.
Well, I had always said to myself that we tell ourself things, and I told myself that if they were to take me now from the heart of the Guantanamo isolation cell where I've been, in total of all these years, and they were to place me into the middle of a shopping center in the heart of Birmingham, I would be able to operate without a blink of an eye because I'd go back to normality. And I've been in prison these many years, it's true, but I've been a free man a lot longer. And I'm going to go back to that which is familiar to me. So that's what I told myself. That was the theory. The reality was I hated sitting amongst people. I couldn't sit in a group of large people and talk and listen and I've still struggled with that to this day. I've got a lot better now. Part of my job is public speaking, so I do meet a lot of people and speak to thousands. But if you ask me, do I like being in a room filled with people? I don't. I really struggle with it. Where there's lots of noise and I focus in on one person saying something, and then I start listening to what somebody else is saying, and then I can't focus onto a conversation at all. Um, but one of the things that I really enjoyed and was missing so much, other than family, was to be able to get in my car, wind down the windows, and speed up a dual carriageway with the wind blowing in my face. And I did so, and I have to admit, at the time when I did it, I don't think I was technically insured, and I don't even know if my license was valid, but I did it.
Yeah, fascinating to hear you say that. And as we come to modern day, Moazzam, I'm interested to know where you see your ministry and your role as a practicing Muslim. I know you've got a real keen interest in Syria, and I just when I knew you were coming on, I remember 10 years ago I was training for the ministry, and I wore a Free Syria wristband then, and
Oh.
here we are 10 years later, and I wonder if I ask you this question: what is Syria anymore, Moazzam? What has it become? What will it be?
Let's start with what it is not. So, amongst the reasons I went there was to go and I'm still trying to investigate the disappearances that, part of the rendition program, the Americans were sending people to Bashar al-Assad. And I met some of those people who were sent. Um, I also went to the prisons. Most people want to go maybe to the historical sites. I go to the prisons and to the old dungeons, and they're horrific. They make Guantanamo look like a holiday camp. And I met people there, including Muslims, Christians, Druze, and even Alawites who'd been imprisoned there and tortured. And the types of brutality that took place there is just beyond description. Um, I actually spoke alongside a Christian priest, um, Baba, as they call him, in Syria, and we were talking about this thing called the Justice Covenant, where everybody believes in and holds on to and seeks a a a way forward, at least when it comes to justice, criminal justice, and that is no to torture, no to arbitrary detention, that nobody can be held for more than 48 hours without being presented either at the courts or being released, habeas corpus essentially. Um, and this sort of stuff, because it was going on before and it's quite possible it may go on again. And the priest I spoke to, it was really interesting because he's a Christian, but guess what his name is? You,
Mohammed?
no, I would no, it's not. Something even more radical than that, if you can call it that. His name is Jihad.
No.
His name is Jihad.
Wow.
We have to remember, and this is really important, I think, for us, especially here living in the UK, is that the Arabs are there's a significant number of them who are Christians, and they speak the Arabic language, and they don't call God God, they call him Allah. And it's important we kind of have that because once we start thinking in terms of religious terms, um, it's quite normal for them to say things like Alhamdulillah, praise be to God, because that is the Christian Arab way of saying it. Um, and I found that as a result of, so to answer your question, I found that the relationships between at least the Christians and the Muslims there seem to be good. The other groups, maybe not so much. The Alawis, who are a branch of, supposed to be a branch of Islam, the Druze and so forth, less so. But I've sensed that the relationship between the Christians and Muslims was kind of a natural relationship.
And how does this play into where we are in the UK? Moazzam, I live in Burnley with a large Muslim population here. And some of my friends are Muslims, and you and I are having a conversation. But there are, the radical extremes of both our faiths, people who would denounce us even having a conversation together, or even to have a friendship. They would, we would be infidels, wouldn't we? We would be kind of should be enemies. But I prefer not to. That's not my interpretation of Christianity, and I'm sure that's not your interpretation of Islam. So where is the role for the moderate view in our society, and how can that, I mean, it breaks my heart what's happening in the Holy Land. I've been very fortunate to go on a couple of occasions, and I get it. I think I get it. I know it's very complex, but I wonder if there is a way forward. It is through moderate Christians and Muslims who can kind of obviously the model that's been used in Ireland as well, whether that's a way forward for hope. What's your thoughts?
Well, my as I said, my kids. So I've been married. I've been divorced now and remarried. But my previous wife, we were married together for about 25 years. Um, she's Palestinian, and they are from the dispossessed, the people who've been thrown out of their homes and can no longer return to them. What's taking place, in my view, in the Holy Land, in Palestine, Israel, etc., I think we have to be absolutely crystal clear about ethnic cleansing, about apartheid, um, and until we are, the world is seeing is that brute force is what determines it. Now, the response by Palestinians is, yeah, they're going to try force with force. That's not the answer in the end. It's not the answer. Um, but there has to be some process of redress. If there's one thing we learned from South Africa, and why Mandela went from being a terrorist that people wanted hanged to having statues of him outside Parliament, is a recognition, the truth coming out first of all. And here, the truth isn't. Nobody even wants to discuss that. Uh, I personally think my view is people of faith. I'll be doing a talk in a couple of days with a rabbi about Palestine. Um, I think people of faith could play a very, very strong role in bringing about understanding. But I mean people who are actually committed to their faith, not people who are using faith for um, for a political purpose, whether it was ISIS or whether it's, Netanyahu and his far right government. You can see the direction and what they're trying to do. So I personally think that true people of faith, whilst they may have the correct and obvious um, disagreements, they in the end want to see flourish. They want to see their own people flourish as much as everybody else. And there's a beautiful verse in the Quran that says that, "O people of the book, you are essentially not on anything until you establish the Torah and the New Testament." And I thought that's a beautiful thing because that reiterates what I feel about people of faith, especially the great Abrahamic faiths. And when I see them in such places, I don't feel animosity. I feel I wish we had more of this. I wish I had people who really adhered to their faith and understood just as much as history says, oh, we had the Crusades, etc., etc., but we also had tolerance. We had interaction. We had people learning from one another. We had people respecting one another. And that's where we need to get, I hope. And I think in a increasingly godless society, people of faith, I think, will ultimately offer a much greater solutions than we're being given credit for.
Yeah, I agree. One of my great heroes is Desmond Tutu, who talked when the people in his township, the ANC, took power, and there was this kind of desire to kind of for retribution, and Tutu put his hand up and said, "No, no, retribution is not the way to peace. It's only the way to retribution." And I find that very profound, actually. To actually just I do worry where the leaders are in our communities, though, Moazzam, who've got the strength and courage of and also the respect to do that. I'm part of the Church of England. If I'm being honest, I'm not sure who that person would be for us, but it is very much needed, and I couldn't say of any people of faith in the UK where that might be, unless you know of others.
No, you're right. I think people of faith at the moment are very compromised in whichever direction they're coming from. I don't mind if people have a particularly strong, even maybe a difficult view, but I can respect something that stands upon principle. And I think principles is where a lot of us are not seeing a lot of the problem with what happens, and I think with a lot of the interfaith stuff, is that because of the desire to please everyone else, you end up watering down some of your principles, and I don't think anybody should do that, in my view. We should be the first thing we should start off with is our manners, how we speak to people, because that makes all the difference. Um, and how we interact, how we present ourselves. You don't have to be fire and steel. You don't have to be, threatening people and so forth. You can be firm upon your principles, and be kind. And I often think of the relationship between how Salah ad-Din was, in relation to his enemies, and that sort of up and down between Richard the Lionheart. You can be enemies, yeah, even at the worst of situations, um, but you can be respectful, and you can look back and say that there was a time when we respected one another, even as adversaries. There's this beautiful verse in the Quran which says, "O you who believe, stand as just witness for Allah, and do not allow your animosity or dislike of a people to cause you to do them an injustice. Be just. That is closer to God consciousness." So I hope from our community and indeed from yours, that we can hold on to our principles. I'm much happier to see people of principle from different faiths than to say, well, sorry, I don't believe in our faith anymore, so I've got my framework of principles is gone, therefore my principles don't matter anymore.
Yeah, and it was Jesus himself who said, "Love thy neighbor as thyself," didn't he? With all
Yeah.
thy heart, with all thy mind, and with all thy soul. And he said that there's no commandment greater than this. Final question, Moses. Are you hopeful for a brighter future? Are you an optimistic man?
I used to be. I used to be very, very optimistic. What I've seen over the past few years has kind of. I thought, with the war on terror years and all of the legislation, the targeting of Muslim Islamophobia was going to that it's come to an end now after the occupation of Afghanistan, but it started again. And when it happened with Gaza and Palestine, it's like 2.0. And I never thought it would get so bad. I never thought it would get so bad that there'd be attacks, that they'd literally, the mosques are being attacked and so forth, as you saw the riots last year. At the same time, I am increasingly of the view that we, as the quote unquote Muslim community, we're not doing ourselves any favors. We're just not. In relation to behavior, in relation to how we present ourselves, in relation to how we are seen. Um, there's some major problems there, and they need rectifying. And if they're not, I can see the rise of more hatred. I can actually envisage it now. So in that regard, it feels like a tidal wave, and trying to hold back that tidal wave with your hands. I don't know if what will happen. As I said, I went to a Jewish school as a child. I've been to Krakow. I've been to Warsaw, and I've seen the old Jewish neighborhoods that now no longer exist because of the differences in how they were othered and how they themselves were. I dread to think what may happen in this country if the conditions create something similar. I really dread to think. So I'd like to leave on an optimistic note and say that we can all work together to make sure that something like that never happens. And Britain is a unique place for that, and is probably the best place where that couldn't happen. But we've got to work a lot harder to make sure that that's the case.
I absolutely agree, 100%. I think we can be the role model for the rest of the world, but I do worry about, like you say, that tidal wave that I see on the horizon. And I think we all have a responsibility to do our bit. And a sobering way to end, Moazzam. But I'm genuinely grateful and appreciate your time. It's been fascinating talking to you, and I send my best wishes to you from Burnley. I don't know if you're in Birmingham, but if you are, great
I am
place.
indeed. I am indeed.
Are you a Villa or a Blue?
Neither. I'm not into football.
No, okay,
I
okay.
used to be back in the days. I used to be a Liverpool fan, but then people call me a traitor.
Okay, well, I hope people have enjoyed our conversation. Do check out the Godcast. There are literally hundreds of interviews with people of faith and non, and academics and musicians and politicians, everybody. So, Mozam, thanks so much for coming on the Godcast. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you for having me on. And stay blessed.
God bless. Bye bye.
Bye bye.